Hello. In this story, I'll tell you about a human who saved an alien girl and the extraordinary loyalty she shows him. Let's begin the story.
They said no human could survive the shadows of Neo-Verdant. But I found her, trembling and alone, and in that instant, I realized saving her would change everything I thought I knew about loyalty, danger, and what it means to be truly human. And I had no idea she would refuse to let anyone else get close to me. Julian's boots clicked against the cracked metal floor of the abandoned orbital lab, each step echoing through the cavernous space like a question no one was there to answer. He wasn't supposed to be here, of course. He never was, really. His supervisors at the Neo-Verdant Xenobiology Institute had told him explicitly that the old research platforms were off-limits, that their last tenants had vanished under unfortunate circumstances, and that any attempt to explore them would be logged, reprimanded, and possibly featured on the Institute's annual embarrassment report. Julian, being both stubborn and spectacularly curious, had taken none of that seriously. In his defense, curiosity was far easier to justify than common sense, and he had recently discovered that curiosity sometimes came with the unexpected bonus of trouble disguised as adventure. He paused mid-step, peering into the shadows where the lab's broken lights flickered, and swore under his breath. His hover scanner, which looked like a tiny metal crab with blinking red eyes, had gone rogue again. It had developed a fondness for vertical surfaces and was now dangling upside down from a pipe, beeping indignantly. "I swear, if you fall on me one more time, I'm going to sell you on the black market for spare parts," Julian muttered, tugging it free, only to trip over a loose cable. He caught himself just in time with one hand on the floor, his other flailing theatrically in a gesture that probably looked heroic if anyone had been watching. He wasn't heroic. He was a man who had somehow convinced himself he could handle the unknown while constantly proving that he probably couldn't. That's when he heard the sound. It was faint, a soft shuffling noise that might have been the wind through the cracked hull, except the lab was orbiting the planet, and the wind didn't make it this far. Julian froze, every muscle suddenly aware that he might be staring danger directly in the face, or, at the very least, something very small and fragile. The sound came again, a whisper of movement accompanied by a subtle glimmer, like moonlight reflected on liquid. Julian's pulse quickened, though his brain immediately reminded him that panicking in zero-G was both unhelpful and, technically, undignified. He crept forward, his steps careful, whispering to himself things he didn't entirely believe. Probably a maintenance drone. Yeah, totally normal maintenance drone, nothing terrifying at all. When he rounded a corner, he saw her. She was crouched beneath a half-collapsed observation deck, her knees drawn to her chest, her long, pale ears twitching toward every sound. At first glance, she looked human, her skin pale and smooth, her hair a silver cascade that shimmered like polished metal. But the ears betrayed her origin, elegant and impossibly delicate, quivering in a rhythm that seemed almost alive. Her eyes were large, iridescent, reflecting Julian's flashlight with a shimmer he hadn't seen before in any human, animal, or lab specimen. She flinched at his approach, a subtle hiss escaping her throat, and Julian immediately thought, not a fan. Not a fan at all. I don't want to hurt you," he said, holding up his hands, which was standard human diplomacy in movies and apparently also in orbital labs. "I mostly just want to, not die horribly while looking like a moron." She cocked her head slightly, as if judging him, which in his opinion was fair. The ears twitched, then flattened, and she let out something between a sigh and a growl, which Julian interpreted as, "You're hopeless," though he couldn't be sure. He pulled out a small energy bar, hoping that food would bridge the species gap, or at the very least distract her. "It's, not poisoned, I checked, twice." She didn't move, he sighed. "Fine, suit yourself, more for me." He unwrapped it and took a bite, trying to smile nonchalantly, but he almost choked when she moved. In one fluid motion, she leapt from the shadows, ears flicking sharply, and landed on the floor a few meters away. Not at him, but with precise control that made Julian feel like a clumsy sack of flour being watched by a predator that might also be a ballerina. She stared at him, eyes wide, and in the eerie silence that followed, Julian had an idea. "Right," he said, holding up his hands again, this time a little more desperately. You know what we need: teamwork, adventure, possibly not dying. Maybe snacks. He waved the remaining half of the energy bar at her. Think of it as a peace offering, or bribe, or alien diplomacy. I read a book once, might help. For a long moment, she simply stared, and Julian took the opportunity to glance around. The lab was in ruins, cables dangling, broken observation panels, reflecting the green and purple hues of the planet below. And somewhere, a ventilation system groaned in a tone that sounded vaguely accusatory. He swallowed nervously. Okay, here's the deal. Someone's looking for you, probably not the friendly kind. And if they find you, well, you might end up as a really polite lab specimen. Not fun. So if you trust me, tiny, ridiculous human with questionable balance skills, we can get out of here. Her ears twitched again. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, she took a step toward him, then another. Julian held his breath, only to trip over his own foot and crash into a stack of debris, sending a cloud of dust and a few alarmingly twitchy maintenance drones scattering. She froze, then tilted her head, ear tips flicking in amusement, or what he could only interpret as amusement, and approached him, hand extended hesitantly, then withdrawing. Okay, new plan, Julian said, standing and brushing himself off. Apparently, trust is optional. Cooperation, somewhat optional. Hover scooter time. He dragged out a battered hover scooter he had commandeered from storage, its thrusters wobbling dangerously. She stepped back, tilting her head at it like it was a strange alien predator. No, it's fine, mostly harmless. Except for the wobbling, minor detail. Really, you'll love it, I think. After a tense, wobble-filled launch that left Julian clinging to the handlebars, as if his life depended on it, which it probably did. The girl clung to him with surprising strength, her long ears brushing his shoulders as they shot through the ruined corridors of the station. Julian kept talking, nervously joking about the hover scooters, slightly over-enthusiastic thrusters, the alien flora that stubbornly sprouted through metal grates, and the possibility that they might both end up as an accidental science experiment. To his relief and mild surprise, she seemed to relax slightly, though her eyes never left the shadows ahead. Finally, they burst through a broken airlock, the vacuum of space momentarily frozen in streaks of dust and loose panels. Julian clutched her hand instinctively, even though she didn't return it, and they tumbled onto the small rescue craft he had been hiding for emergencies. He fumbled with the controls, muttering about missing manuals, intuitive interface design, and the possibility that he might have memorized nothing correctly. She sat silently, observing, her ears twitching with every alarm and indicator light, and Julian couldn't help but feel a rush of admiration for her. Admiration mixed with the desperate hope that she wasn't silently judging him too harshly. Okay, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. We made it, mostly intact. You're probably thinking this human is insane. And you'd be accurate, but also he might just save your life. Possibly, maybe, fingers crossed. She blinked slowly, and Julian was convinced, for a moment, that the twitch of her ears and the faint curve of her lips constituted a tiny, alien smirk of approval. He laughed quietly to himself, a nervous, breathless sound, realizing that he had just embarked on the most ridiculous, terrifying, and potentially heroic morning of his life. And somehow the alien girl, frightened, graceful, and strangely patient, had let him guide her into the unknown. As the craft hummed and drifted away from the ruined lab, Julian leaned back in his seat, allowing himself a small, exhausted grin. You know, he said aloud, mostly to himself, this is probably the start of something absolutely insane, and possibly hilarious. But hey, at least we didn't explode. Yet. The girl's ears flicked, and she regarded him with those impossibly large, intelligent eyes, silent but unmistakably attentive. Julian felt an odd mixture of relief, awe, and something that might be the first stirrings of trust. He was, he realized, both her unlikely protector and apparently the only person in the universe she trusted enough not to immediately run from. Hovering in the expanse of Neo-Verdant's orbit, Julian couldn't help but make one final, half-joking observation. Well, Lyra, if we survive the next 10 minutes without turning into space dust, I'm officially hiring you as my partner in everything. Adventure, chaos, alien espionage, the usual. She said nothing, only tilted her head, long ears twitching like antennae tuned to every word. Julian laughed again, a sound of nervous triumph, and for the first time, he felt the faint, thrilling possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had rescued more than a life. He had rescued the beginning of an extraordinary story. Julian's apartment in the lower levels of Neo-Verdant was less a home than a carefully disguised fortress of precarious comfort, decorated with scattered alien flora, half-functioning data panels, and the faint hum of protective energy fields that he often forgot to check before tripping over them. He had spent the morning rearranging furniture so that the alien girl, Lyra, as he had decided to call her after a constellation he could barely pronounce, wouldn't accidentally crash into anything valuable or worse him. She had spent that same morning perched on a shelf, observing him with long ears twitching in silent judgment, every time he attempted to vacuum or water a particularly stubborn plant that hummed when touched. Julian swore the plant was judging him back. Okay, he muttered, holding up a small energy vial. I know you probably don't need breakfast in the human sense, but humor me. Just a sip. I promise it's not poison. It's of vitamin water. Definitely vitamin, mostly water, possibly slightly alien. Lyra tilted her head, ears twitching, and took a single, careful sip, eyes never leaving him. Julian breathed out, relieved. Victory. Small but significant, like a human cleaning up after a rogue maintenance drone. He had quickly realized that keeping her safe was going to require a combination of ingenuity, luck, and comedy, mostly comedy, since every security upgrade he attempted seemed to malfunction spectacularly. He tried installing biometric scanners, only to have Lyra hack them in seconds with an alien gesture that left him flailing, muttering something about practical magic disguised as biology. He rigged up holographic decoys to confuse intruders, but the decoys kept tripping over each other, making Julian look like he was orchestrating some absurd puppet show. Lyra watched, occasionally flicking her long hair in amusement, and Julian began to suspect that part of her trust involved simply tolerating his ineptitude with good humor. Despite the humor, danger lurked persistently. Shadowy messages appeared on their private network, left by the organization that had pursued her across star systems. The first one read, "We are coming. Do not be foolish." Julian had stared at it for 10 minutes before replying, typing carefully. "Hello, thanks for the heads up. Very considerate of you. Bring snacks next time." Lyra had tilted her head at the screen, ears twitching as if she found his audacity amusing. Julian attempted to teach her human habits. The first lesson was laughter. He had queued up a hollow comedy show he thought would be universally funny, featuring a clumsy android slipping on oil slicks. Lyra had stared silently for 5 minutes, then imitated the android's slip, perfectly, elegantly, and with an added flourish that sent Julian stumbling backward. "Yes, that's kind of horrifyingly accurate," he gasped, laughing despite himself. "I take it as a compliment." She only blinked, ear tips twitching, and he realized she was already forming a code of her own humor. The second lesson was cuisine. Julian had insisted they attempt a human breakfast. Lyra approached it cautiously, sniffing a stack of pancakes he had stacked precariously on a plate. When he demonstrated buttering, she mimicked him but with her own alien finesse, creating a perfect spiral that stuck to the ceiling. Julian stared upward, pancake in hand, and muttered, "Of course. Naturally. Why am I not surprised?" She blinked at him, clearly aware of the absurdity, and he laughed, a sound of helpless admiration. Yet beneath the comedy, Julian noticed the sharp precision of her vigilance. Whenever the hum of the apartment's energy field fluctuated, her ears twitched. When the outer doors creaked under minor stress, she moved silently to intercept, standing between him and whatever invisible threat lurked. Julian had never encountered such dedication. He tried to coax her into relaxing, suggesting she read a human book, play a holo game, or even take a nap. She would only flick her ears and position herself strategically, as though the notion of leisure was an alien concept when he was in the same room. It was simultaneously frustrating, hilarious, and strangely endearing. One afternoon, Julian attempted to teach her casual human conversation. "All right, Lyra," he said, floating a cup of artificially synthesized coffee in his hand. "Here's how you greet someone. Hello, how are you?" Simple, friendly, non-threatening, common human stuff. She repeated it, perfectly enunciated, but then added a small flourish. Her long ears twitched dramatically, and she bowed in a way humans never did, then added a series of clicks and whistles. Julian nearly dropped the cup in shock. Well, that's innovative and slightly terrifying, but hey, points for style. She regarded him solemnly, yet there was a glint in her eye that suggested amusement. The comedy of daily life was punctuated by moments of subtle danger. A reconnaissance drone from the Shadow organization once made the mistake of entering the perimeter. Julian had panicked, shouting incomprehensible instructions at Lyra, who simply extended a finger toward the approaching drone. In moments, the drone was frozen midair, wrapped in an alien energy pulse she had projected with precise control. Julian staggered backward, half in awe, half in embarrassment. "Yes, good work. Totally didn't, almost die in the process." She blinked slowly, ears twitching, a silent acknowledgement of his ineptitude paired with her quiet competence. As days passed, Julian began to sense that her loyalty was more than simple gratitude. She followed him everywhere, observing every movement, listening intently to every word. She didn't merely react, she anticipated, sometimes stepping forward before he even realized a minor threat existed. Yet despite this intense focus, she never sought to dominate or control. She simply insisted, through subtle gestures and unwavering attention, that she would not allow anyone to come near him without her scrutiny. Julian found himself simultaneously amused, flustered, and deeply moved. He joked frequently, partly to lighten the tension, partly because he was terrified of acknowledging the depth of his own attachment. "Lyra, if you ever decide to let someone close to me, please leave a note. I like notes. Preferably in triplicate, hand-delivered, by a robot, or possibly a pigeon. No, scratch that. Too many variables." Lyra, of course, ignored his humor entirely, though he suspected she appreciated it in some subtle way as her ears twitched at the corners of his jokes. He found himself slowly adjusting to this odd rhythm of life. Moments of absurd comedy, punctuated by silent vigilance, small victories in shared gestures, and an ever-present awareness that the world beyond the apartment could be dangerous. Yet she remained utterly devoted, her loyalty an enigmatic thread that wove itself invisibly through their daily chaos. One evening, Julian tried to explain the concept of friendship. "It's kind of like teamwork," he said, reclining in a chair that squeaked under his weight. "You trust someone enough that you don't have to worry about them sabotaging your breakfast, or, letting a shadowy organization take you out. You basically cover each other's backs." Lyra tilted her head, ear tips twitching thoughtfully. She moved closer than usual, not touching him, but the gesture carried a gravity that Julian struggled to articulate. He chuckled nervously. "Right, so yeah, that's what we are, I think. Weird, slightly terrifying, pancake-concealing level friends." And yet, the humor never entirely displaced the reality of their circumstances. Shadow messages still flickered across the network. Threats cooshed in polite, almost bureaucratic tones, warnings that grew more insistent with each passing day. Julian realized that, despite the jokes, their situation was precarious. But he also realized that for the first time in his life, he had someone who would fight for him, who would think ahead, and who would not allow anyone, even the most dangerous pursuers, to come near without her consent. He tried to imagine a human displaying the same dedication, and the mental picture was both terrifying and laughably improbable. By the end of the chapter, Julian found himself exhausted, laughing at the absurdity of their attempts to integrate Lyra into human life while marveling at her alien ingenuity. He watched her move silently across the apartment, adjusting energy fields, rerouting security protocols, and occasionally flicking a stray cable with a precision that left him slack-jawed. "Okay, yeah, I'm officially impressed. You're terrifyingly competent, and also kind of hilarious. And yes, I know that's not technically a compliment." Lyra's ears twitched once, almost imperceptibly, and for the first time, Julian felt certain that the bond forming between them was not just necessity or gratitude. It was something deeper, something that could survive the chaos of both alien threats and human ineptitude. He leaned back, exhaling with a mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. "Tomorrow," he muttered, mostly to himself, "we try human exercise, possibly, maybe, if I survive." Lyra sat across from him, ears twitching in silent observation, and Julian laughed quietly. Somehow, in this strange, precarious apartment orbiting a neon-green planet, amidst alien flora, wobbly energy fields, and constant threats, they had created a world of their own, ridiculous, tense, humorous, and unbreakably bound by a loyalty neither fully understood. The shuttle shuddered as it approached the orbital station, an ancient skeleton of metal and glass that had long been abandoned, but still pulsed faintly with residual power. Julian gripped the controls, knuckles white, while Lyra crouched beside him, ears flicking at every beep and hum, attuned to every nuance of the station's barely alive energy field. "Okay," he muttered, "remember. We just need to get in, grab the data cores, and get out without being vaporized. Simple, right?" He chuckled nervously, though the laughter came out as more of a wheeze. Lyra tilted her head, eyes reflecting the neon swirl of the gas giant below, and emitted a soft, melodic click that Julian interpreted as, "You are hopeless, but entertaining." The airlock entrance loomed like a giant, judgmental mouth. Julian pressed the docking sequence with the care of someone defusing an alien bomb with his shoelaces, and the doors hissed open. A corridor stretched ahead, dark except for the flickering lights of broken panels. Julian considered turning back, but noticed Lyra already moving forward, silent and precise, almost gliding over the floor as though gravity itself bent to her will. He followed, tripping once, twice, thrice, each stumble accompanied by her soft click that sounded suspiciously like suppressed laughter. Their mission was deceptively simple: retrieve the station's data cores containing evidence of the organization's interstellar operations. Julian, convinced he had a flair for subtle heroics, quickly realized he had underestimated both the station's security systems and his own tendency toward catastrophic clumsiness. Motion sensors hummed and alarms flickered sporadically. Julian whispered, "Stealth mode, definitely stealth mode, totally in control, calm, professional." Lyra, however, didn't whisper. She simply raised a hand, and the sensors froze mid-cycle, lights flickering in a mesmerizing pattern that made Julian dizzy. "Okay," he muttered. "I take back everything I said about us being equally terrifying. You're terrifying in the good way." They reached the data chamber, a vault-like room with a single pedestal holding 3 glowing cores. Julian approached carefully, imagining all the classic cinematic disasters that could unfold. Lyra, however, stepped forward first, scanning the room with her alien senses, long ears rotating subtly to detect the faintest vibrations. "You've got to be kidding me," Julian muttered, reaching for the nearest core, only to trigger a silent trap that sent a harmless but comically sticky foam oozing across the floor. "Yes, of course, that's exactly what I expected." Lyra tilted her head, her expression unreadable, though Julian swore the corner of her mouth twitched in amusement. With Lyra's guidance, they extracted the cores, navigating past malfunctioning turrets that seemed more interested in spinning in place than actually firing, and escaped back into the main corridor. Julian's nerves were taut, yet the absurdity of the situation, foaming traps, half-active turrets, his own panicked babbling, kept him laughing through the tension. "I think we just broke a record for heroic clumsiness," he said, breathless. "Future historians will admire our style." Lyra clicked softly, ears flicking as if she agreed, though the look in her eyes suggested she was secretly cataloging every one of his mistakes for later amusement. As they neared the shuttle, a warning signal flashed. An interception team was already on approach. Julian's stomach flipped. "Great, fantastic timing. What's the phrase? Third time's the charm." Lyra stepped in front of him, a protective gesture that both comforted and alarmed him. With a series of swift, fluid movements, she activated an energy pulse that sent the incoming ships spinning harmlessly away. their magnetic fields entangled like kite strings in a storm. Julian gaped. "You're terrifyingly efficient. Did I say that already? Sorry, I'm repeating myself. It's necessary." Once aboard the shuttle, they launched away from the station, engines whining in protest, and Julian finally allowed himself to exhale. He looked at Lyra, who sat quietly, ears twitching as she monitored their trajectory. He realized something fundamental. He had begun this journey thinking of himself as her rescuer, a human protecting an alien. Now he understood that their bond was mutual. Her loyalty had not only kept her safe, it had saved him countless times, shielded him from harm, and made him confront his own limitations. "Lyra," he said softly, "I don't think I ever thanked you properly." She turned toward him, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light and emitted a soft melodic hum. Julian grinned awkwardly. "Right, that's acknowledgement, I'll take it. Or, I would if I knew how to interpret alien approval. But thank you, really." She simply tilted her head, ears flicking once, and that was enough. Back in the relative safety of Neo-Verdant, Julian delivered the data cores to authorities, exposing the Shadow Organization's illicit operations across multiple star systems. He had expected to feel victorious, but instead he felt changed. Every stumble, every humorous disaster, every moment of terror that had ended in laughter, had taught him something profound about trust, courage, and the peculiar ways loyalty could manifest across species. In the aftermath, Lyra remained by his side, refusing contact with anyone else. Julian had tried to understand it, to reason it, even to joke about it, but the truth was simple. Her devotion was absolute. It was neither possessive nor demanding. It simply existed, a constant presence that both amazed and humbled him. He had grown accustomed to it, to her silent observation, to the subtle humor in her gestures, and to the way her long ears would twitch when she deemed something amusing or worrisome. Life settled into an odd rhythm. Julian began exploring alien habitats with more caution and more humility, often accompanied by Lyra, whose sharp instincts and alien intuition kept him safe. They laughed at misadventures, argued silently over trivial matters like which plant needed watering first, and occasionally teased each other with subtle jokes that only they understood. The world remained dangerous, but now it was navigable because they faced it together, blending human improvisation with alien precision in a partnership that defied expectation. One evening, Julian found himself sitting at the observation window of their apartment, looking down at the neon-green swirls of the planet below. Lyra perched nearby, tail of silver hair brushing against his shoulder, ears flicking in tune with the low hum of the city. Julian realized that he no longer measured his days by the risks taken or narrowly avoided disasters, but by moments of shared understanding, quiet laughter, and the unspoken bond that had formed between them. "Lyra," he said, voice soft, "you've changed me. I think maybe you've saved me more than I saved you." She emitted a gentle, melodic click, and for the first time, Julian felt certain she understood not just his words, but his meaning. Her presence, steady and unwavering, had become both a shield and a mirror, reflecting not only his flaws but his growth, his courage, and the strange, unexpected joy of companionship across worlds. He chuckled, a quiet, full-bodied laugh that filled the room. "Well, I guess that's the universe's way of saying we're officially partners, adventure buddies, heroes of our own clumsy, ridiculous story." Lyra tilted her head, ears twitching, and Julian was certain he saw a trace of a smile. For the first time, the chaos of the galaxy felt manageable, even a little funny, and he knew that together, they could face whatever came next, rogue drones, shadowy organizations, or even more absurd pancake-on-the-ceiling incidents. As the city's lights shimmered beneath them, Julian realized that the journey had changed him irrevocably. He had learned to trust, to improvise, to embrace humor in danger, and to honor a loyalty that transcended fear, species, and expectation. Lyra's devotion, once a mystery, had become a guiding force, teaching him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in its presence, and that the bonds forged in trust and compassion could survive even the most chaotic of galaxies. And in that quiet, floating moment above Neo-Verdant, Julian smiled, knowing